Chapter 13 of The Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu. This recording is in the public domain. Recording by Elaine Tweddle. The Return of Dr. Fu-Manchu by Sax Rohmer. Chapter 13 The Sacred Order. Smith stepped quietly across the room and tried the door. It proved to be unlocked, and an instant later we were both outside in the passage. Coincident with our arrival there arose a sudden outcry from some place at the westward end. A high-pitched grating sound, in which guttural notes alternated with a serpent-like hissing, was raised in anger. "Dr. Fu-Manchu," whispered Smith, grasping my arm. Indeed, it was the unmistakable voice of the Chinaman, raised hysterically in one of those outbursts which in the past I had diagnosed as symptomatic of dangerous mania. The voice rose to a scream, the scream of some angry animal rather than anything human. Then, chokingly, it ceased. Another short, sharp cry followed, but not in the voice of Fu Manchu, a dull groan and the sound of a fall. With Smith still grasping my wrist, I shrank back into the doorway as something that looked in the darkness like a great ball of fluff came rapidly along the passage toward me. Just at my feet the thing stopped, and I made it out for a small animal. The tiny gleaming eyes looked up at me, and chattering wickedly, the creature bounded past and was lost from view. It was Dr. Fu-Manchu's marmoset. Smith dragged me back into the room which we had just left. As he partly reclosed the door, I heard the clapping of hands. In a condition of most dreadful suspense we waited, until a new ominous sound proclaimed itself. Some heavy body was being dragged into the passage. I heard the opening of a trap. Exclamations in guttural voices told of a heavy task in progress. There was a great straining and creaking, whereupon the trap was softly reclosed. Smith bent to my ear. "Fu Manchu has chastised one of his servants," he whispered. "There will be food for the grappling irons tonight." I shuddered violently, for, without Smith's words, I knew that a bloody deed had been done in that house within a few yards of where we stood. In the new silence I could hear the drip, drip, drip of the rain outside the window. Then a steam siren hooted dismally upon the river, and I thought how the screw of that very vessel, even as we listened, might be tearing the body of Fu Manchu's servant. "Have you someone waiting?" whispered Smith eagerly. "How long was I insensible?" "About half an hour." "Then the cabman will be waiting." "Have you a whistle with you?" I felt in my coat pocket. "Yes," I reported. "Good. Then we will take a chance." Again we slipped out into the passage and began a stealthy progress to the west. 10 paces amid absolute darkness, and we found ourselves abreast of a branch corridor. At the further end, through a kind of little window, a dim light shone. "See if you can find the trap," whispered Smith. "Light your lamp." I directed the ray of the pocket lamp upon the floor, and there at my feet was a square wooden trap. As I stooped to examine it, I glanced back, painfully, over my shoulder, and saw Nayland Smith tiptoeing away from me along the passage toward the light. Inwardly I cursed his folly, but the temptation to peep in at that little window proved too strong for me, as it had proved too strong for him. Fearful that some board would creak beneath my tread, I followed, and side by side we two crouched, looking into the small rectangular room. It was a bare and cheerless apartment, with unpapered walls and carpetless floor. A table and a chair constituted the sole furniture. Seated in the chair, with his back towards us, was a portly Chinaman who wore a yellow silken robe. His face it was impossible to see, but he was beating his fist upon the table, and pouring out a torrent of words in a thin, piping voice. So much I perceived at a glance. Then, into view at the distant end of the room, paced a tall, high-shouldered figure, a figure unforgettable, at once imposing and dreadful, stately and sinister. With the long bony hands behind him, fingers twining and intertwining serpentinely around the handle of a little fan, and with the pointed chin resting on the breast of the yellow robe, so that the light from the lamp swinging in the center of the ceiling gleamed upon the great dome-like brow, this tall man paced somberly from left to right. He cast a sidelong, venomous glance at the voluble speaker out of half-shut eyes, and in the act they seemed to light up as with an internal luminance. Momentarily they sparkled like emeralds, then their brilliance was filmed over as in the eyes of a bird when the membrane is lowered. My blood seemed to chill, and my heart to double its pulsations. Beside me Smith was breathing more rapidly than usual. I knew now the explanation of the feeling which had claimed me when first I had descended the stone stairs. I knew what it was that hung like a miasma over that house. It was the aura, the glamour, which radiated from this wonderful and evil man as light radiates from radium. It was the vril, the force of Dr. Fu-Manchu. I began to move away from the window, but Smith held my wrist as in a vise. He was listening raptly to the torrential speech of the Chinaman who sat in the chair, and I perceived in his eyes the light of a sudden comprehension. As the tall figure of the Chinese doctor came pacing into view again, Smith, his head below the level of the window, pushed me gently along the passage. Regaining the sight of the trap, he whispered to me: "We owe our lives, Petrie, to the national childishness of the Chinese. A race of ancestor worshippers is capable of anything, but Dr. Fu-Manchu, the dreadful being who has rained terror upon Europe, stands in imminent peril of disgrace for having lost a decoration." "What do you mean, Smith?" "I mean that this is no time for delay, Petrie. Here, unless I am greatly mistaken, lies the rope by means of which you made your entrance. It shall be the means of your exit. Open the trap." Handing the lamp to Smith, I stooped and carefully raised the trap door, at which moment a singular and dramatic thing happened. A softly musical voice, the voice of my dreams, spoke: "Not that way, oh God, not that way!" In my surprise and confusion I all but let the trap fall, but I retained sufficient presence of mind to replace it gently. Standing upright, I turned, and there, with her little jeweled hand resting upon Smith's arm, stood Karamaneh. In all my experience of him, I had never seen Nayland Smith so utterly perplexed. Between anger, distrust, and dismay he wavered, and each passing emotion was written legibly upon the lean, bronzed features. Rigid with surprise, he stared at the beautiful face of the girl. She, although her hand still rested upon Smith's arm, had her dark eyes turned upon me with that same enigmatical expression. Her lips were slightly parted, and her breast heaved tumultuously. This 10 seconds of silence in which we three stood looking at one another encompassed the whole gamut of human emotion. The silence was broken by Karamaneh. "They will be coming back that way," she whispered, bending eagerly toward me. How, in the most desperate moments, I loved to listen to that odd, musical accent. "Please, if you would save your life and spare mine, trust me." She suddenly clasped her hands together and looked up into my face passionately. "Trust me, just for once, and I will show you the way." Nayland Smith never removed his gaze from her for a moment, nor did he stir. "Oh!" she whispered tremulously, and stamped one little red slipper upon the floor. "You won't heed me? Come, or it will be too late." I glanced anxiously at my friend. The voice of Dr. Fu-Manchu, now raised in anger, was audible above the piping tones of the other Chinaman, and as I caught Smith's eye in silent query, the trap at my feet began slowly to lift. Karamaneh stifled a little sobbing cry, but the warning came too late. A hideous yellow face, with oblique, squinting eyes, appeared in the aperture. I found myself inert, useless. I could neither think nor act. Nayland Smith, however, as if instinctively, delivered a pitiless kick at the head protruding above the trap. A sickening, crushing sound, with a sort of muffled snap, spoke of a broken jawbone, and with no word or cry the Chinaman fell. As the trap descended with a bang, I heard the thud of his body on the stone stairs beneath. But we were lost. Karamaneh fled along one of the passages lightly as a bird, and disappeared as Dr. Fu Manchu, his top lip drawn above